And so if you're like, you hear the word rule of life and rules pop into your mind and fundamentalism and like do this, don't do that, or it's originally what I thought of, like, hey, don't go to the movies because it's the devil, like this really like 1950s like fundamentalist form of Christianity. That's not what a rule of life is. It's not the goal. It's not the idea. Again, it is this idea of a schedule. So a more practical definition, this is from John Mark Comer, is a rule of life is a schedule and a set of practices and relational rhythms that help us create space in our busy world for us to be with Jesus, become like Jesus, and do what he did. Ultimately, it's to live to the full, it says in John 10:10, to live to the full in his kingdom and in alignment with our deepest passions and priorities. So a rule of life is saying, I'm going to structure my life around being with, becoming like, doing what Jesus did, figuring out what I'm passionate about as well, and partnering with that with what God is passionate about in the world, and actually setting those things in my structure and in schedule. I think this was mentioned in maybe a previous teaching, but Stephen Covey says that inner peace comes when our desires match our schedule. Nothing is more frustrating in your schedule when you're doing things constantly over and over again that you don't want to do. Like, that doesn't bring inner peace. And so I would say long-term, successful, like faithful discipleship leads to us actually having our passions of what it looks like to live in this world and follow Jesus and be with and become like and do, and actually match that into our schedule and have alignment and rhythm and flow and consistency, long-term consistency. So we're talking a lot about what is the rule of life, because I think it's important just to define, because I think, again, growing up in a church environment, rules were very heavy. It's very much like what you don't do, and that was all, following Jesus was about, is not doing certain things and doing other things and just kind of keeping the status quo in that regard. And I want to like alleviate that hump that might be there for this idea of rule of life. And I just want to give some background and context, because for some of us, this might seem like a new idea, but this is actually just a really, really ancient idea and practice. This idea of rule of life, there's lots of examples in Scripture that we'll walk through. And then really even like most of Christian culture throughout, since the early church, had some form of a rule of life. We're going to talk about what that looks like as well. But the word rule, so let's get into kind of the definition. What is it? The word rule comes from the Latin word for trellis. Trellis, T-R-E-L-L-I-S, trellis. Does anyone know what a trellis is? And I'm actually don't answer that question. A trellis kind of, because usually people don't, and this is supposed to be not responsive. So a trellis, handled that perfectly. A trellis is something that would hold up a vine or a plant to help that vine or plant grow. So we don't live in an agricultural society. And so I didn't really grow up around plants. My mom attempted to plant things in our garden for like a week, and we were just so many deer in Connecticut, it wasn't worth it. They ate them all, and it caused more frustration, so she gave up. And so I was never really around any of this, but for vines, specifically grapevines, in order for them to grow and not actually get destroyed by the ground or the rain or by animals or other things, they actually had something called a trellis that holds up the vine and allows the fruit to grow really more like better, like more holistically, and not be attacked by the things that it might get attacked by if it was on the ground, laying flat on the ground. And they learned that if they actually hold it up a bit, that it actually grows better. And this word rule actually came from the idea of trellis, is that our rule of life, our schedule, the practices that we form in our lives act as a trellis to the fruit that we produce. So if Jesus is the vine and we are the branches, the trellis, our schedule, actually holds up those vines, those branches, and actually helps us produce those fruit. And a lack of schedule, a lack of rule of life, a lack of a trellis leaves us on the ground, susceptible to whatever might come. And so this trellis holds us up and allows us to produce that fruit. I mean, really specifically, it actually comes from the Latin word regula, which it really meant rhythm, and that's how it was kind of turned into this word of rule. So again, the word rule, we're not talking about do's and don'ts, but we're talking about this idea of rhythms, this idea of a trellis holding us up. And Pete Scazzero says it really simply. A rule of life, very simply, is an intentional, conscious plan to keep God at the center of everything we do. It's really just the basics of it. It is being intentional about, I'm going to keep God at the center of everything I do. and plan and schedule that intentionally. And I think it's really important for us to see, as we talk about all the time, that moments move us, right? Moments move us, but disciplines mature us. And I think even within that, grace is something we experience, but we actually experience even more of through effort, which sounds antithetical, but grace is not opposed to effort, it's opposed to earning. So we don't earn grace. We don't earn the opportunity for God to extend his love, but through effort, through genuine practicing and follower of Jesus, we actually experience more of that grace that we have not earned, that we don't deserve, but we open ourselves up to experience more of it. So Dallas Willard again says that grace is not opposed to effort, it's opposed to earning. We don't earn grace, but our effort actually opens us up to more of it. And so I think there's a lot of feel-goodness at times in Christianity, in spirituality, meaning oh man, it's all natural and it's romantic, and man, I can just feel certain moments, and the Spirit will blow where it blows, and God, when God moves, and I'm going to be there, and I'm just going to do as I may. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer has a funny quote where he was doing a wedding. He says all right, at first your love is leading to your marriage, but let your marriage actually sustain your love. And basically saying that the feelings, the lovey-dovey feelings in any relationship, in any marriage actually begin to die off. And it's actually the rhythms that we practice, that we begin to have with each other, that actually grow that love past just a lovey-dovey, romantic, honeymoon feeling. And the same is with following Jesus. Our love, it grows past this honeymoon. It's really easy. Man, I just feel God so much, to actually begin to be something that our rhythms are actually growing that love to a deep love that's based off of commitment and practice and consistency and showing up when we don't want to, showing up when things are difficult. And that's actually what a lot of relationships look like. And again, it's the same with our following of Jesus.